Okay, welcome to another episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Welcome back if you're one of our regulars. So today we're going to be talking about a weapon that, in all honesty, based on, again, is always based on my opinion, observations, training, experience, lessons from sensei, those kind of things, right? But this is a weapon that most people overlook, both in the martial arts and in the self-defense realm, even though it's been a part of martial arts and combat systems for centuries, right? And so what we're talking about is the Kusari-Fundo, right? And so very, very quickly here, Kusari, for those of you who are new to this, right? Kusari, or sometimes you'll see it as Gusari with a G, right? It's a Japanese linguistic thing, right? Kusari is a chain, right? And a fundo is a weight, right? So what you're really looking at is a weighted chain. Okay, and the ones, if you know what I'm talking about, length of chain, give or take about arm length, a little bit less, with two weights on the ends. Kind of a later development. The ones that we use have bars or almost teardrop shaped weights that fit into the hand, so you can hit with it. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, you may be more familiar with a term called Manriki Gusari, right? Manriki Gusari. Manriki is the name of a clan, of a lineage, of a school of Japanese martial arts, and then Gusari is a chain. So it's the Manriki chain because that was one of their specializations. Okay, and if this is new to you, don't worry about it, don't fret it. We'll kind of work around it because we're not just talking about this, we're also talking about any flexible weapon. Okay, because often the way we as ninja approach weapons, classical weapons, traditional weapons, anything like that, is as models of, or models for, being able to recognize just about anything as a weapon. Okay, so anyway, I'll take a look at that here as we go along. But people tend to avoid this thing, right? So, but I promise, by the end of this training session, you're going to see why it's worth your attention. Okay. Even if you've never touched one before, okay? So now, when people think of flexible weapons, they immediately picture what? Nunchaku, right? Or as a lot of people say, nunchucks. I guess you end up being numb if you get hit by it, right? It's an old Asian rice flail. A lot of these traditional weapons that people get into, sai and tonfa and nunchaku and things like that, right? These things were all farming tools, right? That were pressed into action and then developed as weapons over time, okay? But either way, right? So they think of flexible weapons, they immediately think of the nunchaku. Movies, right? Video games, dojo demonstrations, right? You can't get away from these things, right? People drool over them almost as much, if not more, than the shuriken, the sword, whatever, right? So you can't escape it, right? It's flashy for a lot of folks. It's fun. It's widely recognized. There's almost no one who doesn't know what these things are, right? Two sticks connected together by a chain or by a rope or whatever, right? People lose their freaking minds, okay? But let me ask you, how practical is that really in a self-defense situation, okay? Now, if we have one in our hands, of course, I mean, you can defend yourself with anything, okay? I'm not diving into that. And I'm also certainly not telling you or anybody else, nunchaku suck, you can't use them for self-defense or whatever, okay? So I'm going to be very clear in this statement here so that we can go back to it or send other people back to it. If they ever say that Sensei Miller, Dai-shihan Miller, whatever, said, don't train with nunchucks can't be used for self-defense, all those kind of things, okay? Nope, okay? You can use anything. You can drown somebody in 2 inches of water in the bottom of a bucket, right? So, but where I really want to go with this when it comes to practicality is that first, in many places, in many jurisdictions, both in the U.S. and around the world, nunchaku are illegal to carry, okay? They're illegal to possess. You might be able to get away with it in certain jurisdictions, like in the Commonwealth or the state that I live in, where if you're in martial arts classes, you can possess them to travel back and forth for that purpose. But if you beat the living shit out of somebody with them on the street, you now possess an illegal weapon. Okay? So the point here is you can't just slip a pair of these things into a pocket and call it a day, right? Just in case something happens, right? Second, its form and use are highly specific, okay? They're not nearly as flexible as a piece of cord or a rope or a chain or whatever. Not that we can't use them for that. I've taught, when we teach youth, things that have to do with Kusari-Fundo fundamentals, right? I give them safety chunks. That way they're not picking up cords and some of these other things that we discuss with the adults and then sneaking them off to school and things like that, right? So they're plastic and rubber and, they're seen as toys now, okay? Anyway, so again, the point here is that you can't quickly and easily improvise one from everyday items, okay? Maybe, right? But it's highly unlikely that when you're being jumped, you're going to see two sticks held together with a piece of rope, string, chain, whatever, just lying around, okay? The chances of seeing a cord or something that may or may not have weights on it or whatever, just raw, okay? So it's not the same, okay? And the other thing that we want to take a look at is a tactical issue, right? If we can get past the awe-inspiring allure, and again, I'm not knocking these things, right? I can use them. I'm just not going to use them the way everybody else does, where they've got these forms and patterns to impress people, right? And that's where we're going to go with this, okay? Most nunchaku forms, as people know them, right? And the way people tend to use them, spend a lot of time with the weapon behind you, behind your back, behind your arms, behind your back, that kind of thing. And I've been in classes where those things were going on, right? And I'm an ex-cop, so hand goes up. When the weapon's behind me, I don't have it out in front of me in a shielding context, right? And so I'd ask, what about that? And the answer I got most often is, oh, you just have to be fast enough that that doesn't happen. You have to keep them like guessing and tricky and all that kind of stuff, okay? So here's a simple ninja tactic that I learned for disrupting the rhythm, causing somebody with that weapon to either hit themselves, have to start over, lose it all together or whatever. So I just take a coin out of my pocket or a rock or something like that, and I just flick it right at their face, okay? And that is enough to disrupt them and hopefully hurt themselves for a second with it. And then they got to regenerate that. But in that instant, I have an opening to either run, enter, whatever, okay? So got to be careful, right? Again, I'm not saying that these things can't be used for self-defense. I'm not saying they're not cool weapons. I'm not saying they're not valid for things, okay? We're looking at something that fits our general need to not have to be carrying something specialized around, okay? Now, contrast that, right? The tactical issue, the legal issues, and the way people tend to think about it and whatnot, right? The cool factor, right? Contrast that with Kusari-Fundo, right? Or even just a modern alternative, okay? Could be a weighted cord. Think about like a power strip, right? With that extension cord coming off of it, or an extension cord anyway that has that knob on the end of it, right? Any power cord that you might pull out of the piece or the appliance, right? A belt, a tie, right? We could add something to it, a scarf or whatever, right? I've tied a scarf very, very quickly. If you know what a monkey knot is or ones that are equivalent, very, very quickly tie a length around like my wallet or fasten it to a keychain or something like that, where you just have this extra little weight, right? And then very quickly you have this thing. Or just tie a knot or two so that you have that extra, but you don't need it. Okay? Like I said, just a raw t-shirt could be that kind of idea, right? Length of rope, anything, right? So the weapon almost never leaves you vulnerable, okay? Based on the way we use it, it's not leaving. Now, it's not a shield the way most people think of shields, okay? Just like with a staff, we have to keep it moving in front of us so that it's harder for them to come into, right? Or come in on us, right? So again, it's almost never behind us. And even if it is, there's moments or exceptions where it might be, right? it's a transitional kind of position just because of the way this thing is moving, right? And then, of course, then you have, there's a kamae that I'm actually teaching on Friday during that master class, where it is behind you, and this is using what I call shadow tactics, where it ends up in a position, and very quickly what you're doing is transitioning it so it comes back in a different direction, right? There's crossover with nunchaku, but it's not the same, okay? As a matter of fact, if you learn to use something that's this flexible, maybe your nunchaku stuff doesn't get stuck in being so formalized, right? Okay. So anyway, let me check my notes here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. So the best part about this raw form, right, is it's the fact that it was an improvised weapon to begin with, right? So it just lends itself to that realm, okay? But you can improvise this weapon almost anywhere, okay? And I've mentioned a whole bunch of things: cords, ties, belts, ad infinitum, okay? This is why mastering it puts you into a very small, rare group of practitioners, self-defense, martial artists, whatever, who understand the dynamics of flexible weapons and have worked with them to get good at them, okay? Today, we're going to explore why that matters, okay? So for that, again, the obligatory, don't forget, like, follow, share, subscribe, whatever platform you're on. That way the algorithms know and can help pass this stuff around to everybody, okay? Anyway, again, we want to look at the benefits of things, but I do want to start kind of in the problem areas. But before we dive into problems and benefits and all that, let's frame this in a tactical context, right? By looking at all the weapons categories, right? There's only 5, right? Across martial arts, in ninjutsu, one of my first lessons was reframing weapons so that I'm not trying to memorize items and learn separate things and move things into the principles and concepts realm by looking at them as in categories, right? Types of weapons, right? And so we'll lay these things out first, just so we have them, right? Very, very quickly here, right? I used to call these things like bladed, stick, whatever. That's how I got it from my teacher. I've changed that terminology. So if you know the old terminology, I'm just switching this, okay? So what we're going to look at is edged, okay? Edged weapons could be everything from sword, knife, could be a hand, just your debit or credit card that you're holding in your hand, right? It's very, very thin, very rigid. You could use that for cutting. Broken piece of glass, whatever, okay? Anything that can stab or cut. Screwdriver, ice pick, if they still have those things anymore, whatever, even a key, okay? So edged weapons, right? Then we have what I'm going to call impact weapons, okay? Sticks, stabs, tire irons, the side edge of a book, okay? Those kind of things. Batons, anything that's blunt, rigid, that kind of thing, okay? And everything obviously has its own range and whatnot, but we're just kind of looking at these things because I just did a class with my inner circle folks on the Kusari-Fundo. One of my students was having a problem with flow and keeping it going in certain contexts. And so we moved this over into the realm of Kentai Chijo, or the body and the weapon are one, as well as Seishin, mind, right? And looking at the mind-body connection, because if the mind is rigid, right, and it's stuck on pattern, style, whatever, body's going to have a hard time just freely adapting, okay? So one of the terms that came up that I used was every weapon has a personality, right? That doesn't mean it's going to talk to you and tell jokes and shit like that. What it means is it has its own nuances. It has its own possibilities and potentials, okay? In the realm of Kusari-Fundo, got a length of chain. The chain itself weighs about 2 ounces, okay? And then each weight weighs about 2 ounces. Now, the Monariki Kusari, it's not a bar, it's a ball. Either way, right? And there's reasons for that ratio, so as to not break the weapon or so as to not have the weapon kind of not be able to function well, right? But so that's going to have a certain bite to it. It's going to have a certain way of moving, and inertia and gravity and shit like that are going to work on it a certain way, right? A scarf's not going to move the same way, okay? Same thing. Same thing with, you get a sword and you got a machete and you have a knife or just a little pen knife kind of thing, or a screwdriver. Handle's bigger than the post, and they each have their center of gravity is in a different place, the balance, right? What you can do with them and all that. That's what we're talking about with these. Okay, so these are not just something that we memorize, right? This is something that we dive into, because to master edge weapons is to understand the dynamics and the personality and the nuances and things of each of these things in different conditions. Same thing with different types of impact weapons or whatever. Okay, so edged, impact, projectile. Okay, this could be thrown or sent. Right, so projectile weapons. Right, could be everything from a shuriken to a rock to a bow and arrow kind of situation. Firearms. But see, firearms also fall into, so most people think of them here. I categorize them somewhere else, okay? Because there's more than one use to them. A lot of weapons have more than one use. So eventually, a lot of weapons end up in a catch-all category. But either way, projectile, again, could be anything that covers more distance, right? It's a long-range weapon that can be thrown, that can be shot, whatever. But they are subject to one's aim. You can't reload. You can't get that thing back that you just sent, which is why the Japanese tend to not like to throw spear. Okay, so when we throw things, we know that we're giving it up. Okay, it's not the same. All right. The fourth category is flexible. Okay, which is where we're going to hang out today. But let's get past this quickly and look at combination. Okay, this is any weapon like a nunchaku, okay, that is an impact weapon, but it's also a flexible weapon. Kind of. Okay. Does that mean a Kusari-Fundo? Like, yeah, it has some impact stuff to it, but how are we using this thing, right? And again, once you go through these things and you study them from the perspective of principles and concepts, and you're not just trying to, like people do, kata accumulation or technique accumulation, right? They're not just doing weapons collecting, right? So everything kind of ends up down here anyway. But I want to take a look at flexible weapons, right? So this fourth category, this is where we're focusing, right? These things are, if you do a search across YouTube, the internet, or whatever, unless you know something that I don't know, these things get taught and covered and demonstrated way less than swords, knives, sticks, other weapons, right? And I think a big reason for that is they have a chaotic nature, right? They're harder to control, right? But see, the benefit is they are uniquely versatile, right? We'll talk about that as we go, right? The benefits of them, to me, far outweigh the things that stop most people, right? But anyway, let's just keep moving these things, right? So again, flexible weapons, from my observation and from my experience, both in research and in actual work, they get the least attention for a reason, okay? And understanding why people avoid them will help you see why those who do master them, right, gain a rare but really huge edge, right? Not that kind of edge, right? An advantage, okay? So before we talk about that, let's take a look at the problem, right? Why people avoid flexible weapons, okay? The first one that I have heard people say, right? Of course, they say it about lots of techniques and whatnot from their mom's basement's, computer keyboard that's full of Cheetos dust, is there's a simplicity assumption, right? So what that means is that most people assume that it's just simple, right? You hold it, you just whip it around, or you just, whatever, right? Pop them with it, that kind of thing, right? I've heard this spoken, right? It's just a chain with a weight, man. I mean, right? I mean, just, you just whip it around. It doesn't take like rocket science, Okay. And then what ends up happening is the person tries this. They grab a cord or one of our training models that's just knotted rope, or one of these things, right? And they do just that. They just whip this thing around and bam, right? It cracks a rib or it hits them on the spine behind them, right? Because they forget. They forget something really, really important. I'm going to mention at least one at a time, if not more, through this. These things, like all weapons, are stupid. They don't have a brain. They will hurt whatever they hit. Everybody likes to assume it's going to be him. But flexible weapons remind you that if you're stupid, if you don't know the weapon like you're supposed to, it will bite you. And these will bite back way more often than more rigid, easier to manhandle kind of weapons. Okay? So they end up hitting themselves, right? They end up hitting ribs, head, whatever. Okay? And that's when the light bulb might go on, that this isn't just whipping or swinging a stick, right? This is going to require control. This is going to require timing, distance, awareness of it, me. My taijutsu has to be better. It all matters. And the fact that mastery requires skill and not just brute force and good enough, right? And so they'll back off, right? I'm sad. And when they're talking to you about it, what you'll hear is things like, it's just not for me. I apologize if you can hear a train going by. Our new location, train tracks right over here. And as much as I hate to be the dojo by the tracks, we really are in a nice town. Just happens to be, and I think that was the local one from across the river to here. So that got passed very quickly. All right. Anyway, so again, people quit this like they quit lots of things that they had great delusions of grandeur about, right? It's just too fucking hard. But they'll set it aside and then tell you, well, it just wasn't for me, right? Or that weapon sucks, or that's too difficult to control, man. You can't defend yourself with that in a fight, right? It's just it's horrendous, right? Okay. And that leaves that opportunity for other folks that are like, really, what makes it difficult to control? How does it have to be controlled? What skill sets do I have to learn so that I can make this thing work for me instead of against me? Okay. All right. Second reason that people don't do this is perceived chaos. Okay. I am here to tell you flat out that cords and the Kusari-Fundo and whatnot, and some of these other longer weapons, Chinese, Japanese, or whatever, the Kuketsu-shoge, the Kusari-gama, the rope darts, a bunch of these things, right? Very chaotic weapons. Okay, what I mean by that is you don't just have to learn how to control it while you're moving it, but you have to be able to neutralize the end result. If I miss, inertia is still bringing this damn bullet around, or whatever the working end is. It's still coming around, okay? If it hits him, okay, it's basic physics. It's going to ricochet off that target. It doesn't just stop in space and then go, hey, boss, what do you want me to do next? Okay? Bounces off of it and heads in a different direction, right? Or it'll hit it and bounce back, right? And if you understand the weapon, what you understand is that you have a weight on the end of a chain or a rope that is tethered to you. And ultimately, that bullet or that ring or whatever it is that's a part of that weapon will come back to its source. So I can't be standing where I was when I launched it, or I can't be standing in the same place I was when it bounced off of him, or I'm going to get hit, or I'm going to get tangled up by it, or whatever. Okay? So this is not the same as stab him and then retract and I can do something else, where this thing never leaves my hands and it's on a vertical line, right? Swords, knife, that kind of stuff, right? It's very different, okay? Very, very different. So flexible weapons are, again, chaotic by nature, right? Gravity, inertia, centrifugal force. You don't have to be a scientist, right? Those people were right. You don't be a rocket scientist, okay? No, but understanding how these kind of things are operating and how you have to neutralize them, okay? If we were doing handgun work, right? Or any firearms work, but handgun work. One of the first questions I ask in the very first level, we have 3 levels of handgun training. Very first level, one of the very first questions, I ask everybody if they understand recoil, kick, whatever you want to call it. Okay, awesome, good, right? How many types of recoil do you have to be able to neutralize in a combat situation? Not plinking cans, not taking your time at the range, right? Right? How many do you have to neutralize to keep that muzzle from moving as far as possible so that in level 2, we can do double tapping and one round to the next round doesn't rise more than about 4 inches? Okay. Spoiler alert, it's 3. And everything gets neutralized by your grip and your posture. Everybody says 1. Well, there's a reason that, and the longer that muzzle, that hole, the length of that tube is not pointing at something on his body, the more of an opening he has to get in, right? So anyway, so it's chaos, right? And so again, right, if you're not paying attention, if you don't have the right skill sets, if you're not learning what you're supposed to be learning, right? Just like people when they first start training with nunchucks, right? Smack themselves all over the friggin' place, okay? This one's cool. You go between your legs and you come back out and then they whack themselves right between the legs, right? Or they take it behind their arm or whatever and they smack a rib or they hit themselves in the head, whatever, okay? But many students seriously underestimate what is involved here, right? Until they felt it firsthand, okay? And again, here's that reminder. This specifically, but this, like all weapons, right, is stupid. Okay? It hurts whatever it touches, him and you. Okay? So to use flexible weapons, to use a Kusari-Fundo, our taijutsu has to be much, much better. The way we generate force, the way we get that end in use. But there's lots of other benefits. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. Okay? But another big reason that we'll kind of round out here with is people don't perceive that it has modern relevance, right? Okay. There's this modern relevance, right? It's what people are doing when they create modern ninjutsu or whatever, because they only see shapes and they only see forms, and they either haven't been taught or I don't know what the problem is, where they're not getting to the principles and concepts that this stuff was based on, and recognizing that those old traditional weapons and whatnot, that was the technology of the day. So the principles and concepts don't change, but the shape of the objects or whatever change into the modern world, okay? And so they're missing this connection. And so what they do is they go and do survival-based stuff, or they go and do commando things or whatever. Not that they're wrong, but that's very narrowly defined, right? And then they go buy all kinds of like cosplay shit, whatever, okay? But many dismiss these weapons because they think, who carries a chain with a weight around, right? And as a matter of fact, if you're carrying something like that around, just like nunchucks, that's illegal. Indeed, okay? But just like in ancient Japan, right, that was a type of saw, right? It was a type of thing that you could wrap around something like a log or whatever and flip over a certain way, and the chain links bite against each other and then tie some cord or whatnot to it and drag this thing along. It was just a makeshift tool. If somebody went through a bag that a workman or whatever was carrying around and looked at stuff, they would see bow shuriken, these throwing spikes, what we call, right? They would see these flat shuriken, these flat plates. They would see Kusari-Fundo, all this stuff, right? And keep digging through the stuff and send them on their way without confiscating anything, without arresting, without killing them or whatever, because those were normal everyday items, right? So what are ours, right? But if you expand your view, right, everyday items are perfect alternatives, okay? So again, we'll talk about those as we go, but again, this tool is not exotic, right? We need to get away from, seeing things as exotic weapons, right? People often ask, right, Sensei, how'd they make this stuff up? Like, how to like, I want to invent a martial arts weapon. Like, how do I do that? I'm like, go down to the local hardware store or go to Walmart or whatever and go back to the lawn and garden section and go to the wall where all the, like, tools are, where the rakes are and the hose and not those kind of hose, right? Where all these things are, right? That's where these things came from. Tonfu was a way to grind rice into flour. Held it along your forearm, grinding this stuff, right? Harvest all the rice, throw all these plants down, beat it with nunchaku, right? This flail to break the little seeds free of stuff. They sink to the bottom. The chaff kind of floats away in the wind, right? Sai, that's poking holes in the ground and dropping some seeds in and then swishing it along that trowel that you made, right? You beat it to break up the earth, stab it, drop seeds, cover it up, keep on moving, right? They didn't have like John Deere and Kubota stuff, right? So anyway, so modern relevance is the other big thing here. Okay? They just don't make the connection. Okay? So that leads us into self-defense benefits. Okay? What are they? Right? So I have a couple, kind of add a couple in here. You know what? I have a bonus if we have enough time. The clock is in a different place. Yeah, wait. Okay. There's a huge bonus that goes overlooked even by people who train this way. I forgot I needed to have room. In my haste to get the board ready, I forgot there's a bunch of sub things under 4 here that I want to put in. So anyway, all right. So what are the self-defense benefits? Right? Modern relevance, self-defense benefits. 1, right? Improvised weapons. Right? This gets your conceptualization faculties, your creative faculties and whatnot, thinking along the lines and seeing things in a different light. For most people in the self-defense, combat, martial arts realm, when they think of weapons, they think of very specific forms, right? One of my black belts one time, he and I were having this discussion. He had, it was New Week, he had spent the weekend with his brother, and his brother was watching these survival shows, right? It was like urban survival, apocalyptic shit, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And he got to thinking, like, you know, what's the best weapon to carry? And so he asks my guy, right? Tim, you know, what would you carry, right? What's the best weapon that you would carry for self-defense, right? And what he was expecting was, you know, a Glock or 9mm or this thing or a shotgun or whatever, right? And Tim said sling, you know, just a belt or a length of cloth, drop a rock or whatever in, send that thing out, right? And I said, yeah, see, sling, blowgun, things like that, right? But that sling thing pissed his brother off because you're not taking this seriously. No, I am taking it seriously, okay? Guns run out of ammunition. Guns also signal other people that you have ammunition and probably food that they're going to come and try to take from you. But a sling makes no sound. And you can find ammunition anywhere. It's easy to create. It's easy, right? A little bit more difficult to learn because you can't just point and shoot, but you're not going to run out of ammunition. There are stones in an urban survival situation, at post-apocalyptic or post-zombie, whatever, right? Any place you go into that had kids, you're going to find shit like Matchbox cars, right? If you've never used a Matchbox car from a sling position, try that, okay? Blowguns, easy to fashion. I teach students how to make a blowgun out of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, a Post-it note, and paper clips, and some tape, but the tape is optional, okay? And you can fashion these things, but any pole lamp, anything like that you can take apart, you now have this tube. They're very easy to fashion. The weapons, you can make a blowgun dart out of a small berry and a pin, right? So very easy. And now they make no noise. If I'm in an urban survival situation, right? Pigeons, rats, those kind of things, that's going to be the staple food when everything else gets cleaned off. Okay? No, I'm not bringing down an elk or a black bear or whatever with it, but right, the things I am going to go after, squirrel and those kind of things, right? Easy. And now I'm not signaling to anybody that I've got food. I'm not letting people know my location because I didn't make this loud noise. And I'm not going to run out of ammunition. Okay? A straw, spitball, and a pin or some makeshift kind of thing, even if it's a toothpick or whatever. Right? Easy, right? And it's a surprise as far as a self-defense weapon. Right? Because people are going to see a straw in your hand. They're going to see this thing that they're not going to take seriously. Okay? So improvised weapons. All right. Anything else that I had on that? Nope. Okay. So just as an example of that, right? Imagine a crowded hallway, right? And a scarf with a knot. Okay. And you don't have to knock the guy out, right? You can distract or redirect without alerting anybody. And because the weapon's flexible, it adapts to almost any environment. Okay? That leads us to adaptability. Okay? Adaptability, right? The beauty of flexible weapons is not just the improvisation, right? But unlike a rigid weapon, you're not constrained as much by length, range, or angle. Okay? You can strike around obstacles. You can extend your distance. You can recover it quickly. You can change angles and come in from other directions. There's a tactic that can be used by any of these weapons that kind of go. I learned it with the Kyukutsu Shoge, but anything like that, where you send the weight past his head, right? You send it close to his head, but past it, right? Where you know that his flinch response is going to cause him to move. Okay. Now he's feeling pretty good about himself because it just missed. Except I'm going to yank back on it quickly, and it's going to. Right? I sent it in a way so that I can punch him in the back of the head. So once it's missed, okay, there's another one, same thing, where he'll get a hold of it because of that reflex, and now he thinks he's got me. And then there's a way to send a loop up and over his wrist and yank him off balance, and then finish him off with the other side. Things like that, right? Wrap limbs, all that. Okay. So, but even if I have it handheld, he grabs a hold of me and it's in here close and I can't hit him with this end, right? He's controlling the weapon hand. I can hold on to one weight or one end of it and drop the rest of it, catch it with my free hand and start tying him up or jab him with it or whatever. See, I literally have two small Kubotan and this length of flexible material that, in essence, I have what? 3 weapons, 4 weapons, 5 weapons, depending on how I'm using it. Okay? So the weapon conforms to the situation rather than the other way around. Okay? And it's very, very flexible. And I don't mean just flexible this way. I mean in the way you're going to use it. Isuka Sensei, I'm going to miss him a lot. For those of you who know, he passed away here recently. He was talking about adaptability once and flexible weapons. And he said the true skill of a warrior is in learning to turn the unexpected into advantage. And flexible weapons are a mirror of that principle. Okay? So improvised weapons, adaptability, concealment and deployment. Okay? So concealment and deployment, right? Small, portable, it's easily hidden, right? You can carry it and deploy it without anybody noticing, right? A cord tucked into your pocket or a belt loop, right, becomes a defensive tool at a moment's notice. Okay? When I buy certain things, certain pieces of clothing and whatnot, it's not just about, is that a cool design? Is that trendy in style or whatever? But like with my belts, they have to have a certain type of flexibility to them, right? Or whatever flexibility there is, I have to think about that. When I buy shoes, right? No rigid soles, right? I have to be able to flex and move with those things, okay? And if it has a certain layer that allows for stealth and whatnot, that's even better, okay? No, I'm not going to be like ninja sneaking into some place in a friggin' 3-piece suit or a tuxedo. But if I've got to grab my wife and we've got to go hide from some group of shitheads that thought they were going to, do a mugging or whatever, and I'm moving. I don't want to sound like I'm creating footsteps. Okay. So anyway, and then tactical advantages. Okay? Tactical advantages. Right? Take a look at this from two perspectives. Right. There's a little bit of crossover here, but not a lot. Okay. So first one is combat advantages. Okay. Combat. Right? Actually, in the moment when you're ducking and covering and all that kind of stuff. Right. So we're going back to the adaptability, but this is adaptable at any range. As long as I can reach him with it, right? Long range, mid range, close range, very close range. Okay. I can create distance, surprise, and leverage. Distance, surprise, leverage. Okay. So it can act like an impact weapon. It can act like a projectile weapon, right? I can shoot one of those weights out of my hand while holding onto the other one. So it's like throwing a rock at him, except that I can pull it back like a yo-yo, right? You know that yo-yos were originally developed as weapons, right? Not toys. Okay. So, and then this also enhances tactile sensitivity. I'm going to talk about that here in a bit, right? So, well, that's what we're going to lead into with the bonus. So let's just do that, okay? The bonus value to this, the bonus value to learning Kusari-Fundo and even the longer traditional weapons and flexible weapons in general is skill crossover. What I mean by this is that learning flexible weapons improves both your Nimpo Taijutsu skills, I'll talk about some of those, and your other skills with rigid weapons, okay? Because you have to get more tactily aware of where the hell that thing is in space. Pull, is it coming back? What does that feel like? Those kind of things, right? And so this improves uke nagashi and defensive sensitivity, okay? Because this thing is ultimately connected to my hand. It doesn't matter if I'm swinging, shooting, whatever. If it's going out toward him, if it's ricocheting and in what direction, if it's coming back toward me, those kind of things, right? And so it's connected to me, and I'm reading that through this connection, okay? And uke nagashi, we can get past the idea that it's a block. I think the first Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday I did, and if not the first, within the first 3 years ago, right, was on uke nagashi not being a block. It's not that you can't block with it, but that's called uke dome, right? Uke nagashi, receiving stop, is like an insect's antenna. So when I make contact with this person, right, to receive this thing, I'm getting all kinds of information about intent, directional force, strength, rigidity, all kinds of things. Just showing this the other night with folks in class that from Kumiuchi, right? I just had one of my shidoshi help me out. And when he came in, instead of me just grabbing his lapel, because he grabbed my lapel, and grabbing his sleeve, because he grabbed my sleeve, right? It's basic setup. When I placed my hands here, this elbow, right, was receiving and feeling his hand, right? I had 5 points of contact. The scrolls say 3 or more. Have 3 or more points of contact with the attacker when you're in a jutai kind of situation. I had 5, right? Because where he was touching me, I'm paying attention to that, right? There's a tactile sensitivity going there that I can feel, right? The side of my arm touching his hand that's grabbing the clothing, right? And then where I'm touching him, I was touching there, but my wrist was touching another spot on his arm, and then up here was touching the outside of his hand before hit. So I had like 4 right here, and then I had 6. My hand on him, and then my elbow. So 5 or 6, either way. Okay, get a lot of information this way. Okay, it forces continuous motion, which means you get better tai-sabaki. Okay, because when you send that thing out and it hits him, it's coming back. Right? And so whether I swing it, shoot it, whatever, I need to make sure that I'm able to get out of the way of this thing so it doesn't crack into. My daughter the other night, her first experience with these weapons, she swung this thing around, she moved herself, but she wasn't paying attention to what her hand was doing that was holding it, and it came around, and it was just a rope mock-up with a knot on it, and it smacked the inside of her knee and left quite the welt. Right? She was surprised that, well, it's just cotton rope and it's just a knot. Yeah, well, that knot is very special, right? So it makes your tai-sabaki way better, and it forces you to stay in motion, okay, and not to be doing shit from a standstill kind of thing. Not that that doesn't have its purpose, okay? But every time you stop, you become a stationary target, okay? So be judicious with where you stop and how you stop and why you stop, okay? It develops intuitive sense of gravity, inertia, weapon positioning, those kind of things, okay? Because you don't have time to think about it, right? As an example, a student practicing just basic strikes began noticing that their timing and sensitivity was improving even when they were doing empty hand, right? When they were doing randori or sparring or whatever, right? The weapon itself became a teacher for the body, okay? Because if you mess it up, the weapon will remind you, okay? So a couple of quotes to kind of round this out. Manaka Sensei, when I was training with him, both in the Bujinkan and a little bit at the beginning when he formed the Jininkan, every weapon is an extension of the body. We know this, right? Kentai Ichijo, right? But what he said was, master the small and the large will follow, right? Sumi Sensei, right? One of his big ones is learn what others ignore and you survive what others cannot, okay? Anytime there's a hole in things, right? There's one of two reasons why few people do any given thing. One, it's just not applicable. It's getting outdated or whatever, like old technology, old tools or whatever, okay? But be careful with that, okay? I have a phone. I went to Walmart and bought a phone that is an old style phone. I don't mean it's hardwired to the wall and all that kind of stuff, and it's like the little dial. No, okay, it's a push button, okay. But the old style phones, when you plug them into a modular jack, you don't need to plug them into the wall for electrical power. They need that little electricity that they pull that from the phone lines, and so that's in my bug out kit, because if I ever need to make a call and I find myself someplace, some older building or whatever that has those jacks, if it still has communication capabilities, I don't need a digital phone that I have to plug in. I don't have to worry about a battery dying. I don't have to worry about anything. I can plug it in and hopefully get through somewhere, okay? So be careful when we start thinking about what's outdated and what's not available. But the other big reason that there's a hole in things is either people don't understand it well enough or they don't want to understand it because it's too damn difficult. They want quick and easy, okay? More people will go to Amazon or whatever and order filtration straws to purify water, which have very limited uses, very few uses, right? And put those in their bug out kit instead of learning 5 different ways to purify water for when that thing isn't working anymore, and to keep from poisoning themselves or getting a bacteriological infection or whatever, okay? Same thing. They would rather carry water or do the obvious than learn, like all my students that go through the survival training have to learn 5, right? Water collection methods, 5 purification methods. The more you know, the more situations you can collect water in, right? The more purification methods you know, the more pure you can make the water, because each one eliminates a certain type or a certain amount, right? Okay, 5 different ways to start a fire. We give them 9 different fire structures because shit could be wet. You can be in an area where you have sparse stuff and you don't have a lot of fuel and you need to make that last longer. All kinds of things. Do I need it directional? Do I need a big flame? Do I need, right? To most people, fire is a fire is a fire. Yeah, you know what? A punch is a punch is a punch too. but certain fists fit in and against and do maximum damage on certain areas of the body than others. But if we're just counting hits for points, it's not the same. If we're focusing on dropping somebody as quickly as possible, 10 seconds or less, 4 moves or less, matters a lot. Okay. So this week, what do I have here? I'll come back to this here just for a quick second. But this Friday, we're actually doing a Kusari-Fundo masterclass. It is going to turn into, it's going to be recorded, it's going to turn into a program that later I'm going to charge more for it. Okay, I'm going to add in some other classes and some other lecture type stuff. This will be there, but some other things will be there as well. But in the beginning, people need to learn 5 core skill sets, okay, to get started with this weapon. Okay, they need to learn obviously how to grip it, how to hold it, single hand, double hand. We're going to give 5 combat kami to go with it. We're going to be teaching direct engagement strikes. I'm going to give you 3 different ways to strike somebody straightforward with it. And then we're going to do 8 directional swinging strikes. And we're going to teach you how to ground out that momentum and get that weapon to slow down and almost stop so you can change direction very, very quickly. Okay? And the big thing is we're going to teach you the skills for doing all that without hurting yourself, so it doesn't bite you. Okay, so if you're interested, that class for this thing here, right, is $9. Later, I'm telling you now, it's going to be $47 easily, with or without the bonuses. So if you want to jump in, great. If not, no harm, no foul. Okay, and even if you don't show up for that, you get the recording anyway. Okay, so just to jump back into the skill crossover thing one more time, this little known value add, right, for those who train seriously, right? Working with flexible weapons develops tactile sensitivity, timing, awareness, certain types of zanshin, right? Nagashi improves, tai-sabaki improves, right? You learn to feel the weapon, its pull, gravity, inertia, without even thinking about it, okay? Advanced students that really dive into this and get a handle on this, right, find that training with flexible weapons changes how they handle all their other tools, okay? Changes their taijutsu, right? How flexible weapons can change your training, right? And that, my friends, is something, like I said, we'll explore in this Friday class. Got to get a handle on the basics, right? So if you've been curious or thinking about adding flexible weapons or how flexible weapons can enhance your overall skills, okay, Friday class is where theory becomes practical mastery. All right. So that's what I have for this episode. If you guys have any questions, if you had a specific aha moment, right, put that in the comments. Okay. By the way, I laugh at and then delete or ignore anybody who has the that shit doesn't work in a fight kind of thing, or you can't use it, or this is all bullshit, or whatever. Okay. Anybody that follows me normally on, I think I posted this one on Facebook. I shared a meme that it was a joke. It was a riddle. Okay. So I'll end this with that. How many martial artists does it take to screw in a light bulb? 100. Well, actually, it takes 1 to screw in the light bulb, and the other 99 to tell you why it's wrong and why it won't work on the street. Okay? And I'll leave you with that. So hopefully I'll see you for the Friday class. If not, I'll see you next week on Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. See you. Train hard.